This situation in the Strait of Hormuz has entered its second day. Meanwhile, China's Minister of Defense Dong Jun has come out and stated that the United States will not be allowed to blockade Chinese ships. So what does this mean? What's the key point here? Will the Chinese Navy come to the Strait of Hormuz to provide escort? If that's the case, then this is a very interesting development. Could the Chinese military actually confront the US military head-on? All right, that's the first point to watch. The second point is that Xi Jinping has also made his first statement regarding the situation in the Middle East. What did he say? And how does this influence China's stance in the Iran conflict? Would China really go head-to-head with the United States for the sake of Iran? This is the first topic I want to bring to everyone today. In addition, what are the latest developments in the Iran war? The United States has implemented what they call an anti-blockade, which is also a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. What impact does this have on Iran? This might be something many people haven't considered. Another thing is that there are negotiations about to take place in Washington, D.C., talks between Israel and Lebanon. Wow, you might think, what's so significant about such a small piece of news? Well, it's actually not small at all. This is actually quite significant news. Of course, it's a very, very American piece of news. So from this news, we can see that Trump's Middle East strategy may very well include, in addition to the so-called Greater Abraham Accords, a sort of lesser Abraham Accords. So what exactly does that mean? I think we can learn a lot about the United States and the Middle East from this. Good kids, let me say it again. If you like this program, you can click subscribe, and after subscribing, turn on the little bell. I think when we look at American news, we always need to pay attention to the knowledge behind the news and the deeper meaning it contains. This value is good. Welcome to listen to and watch Good Morning America. Hello to all the viewers of the Good Morning America program on YouTube, and I hope everyone tuning in to Silicon Valley FM 96.1 is doing well. All right, let's get straight to the point. Let's talk about Trump's so-called American version of the Hormuz Strait blockade, which has now entered its second day. Basically, this means that any cruise ship from any country that is docked at Iranian ports or along the Iranian coastline is not allowed to leave. So now, the US Navy has completely blockaded dozens of Iranian ports. Any ship from any country, of course, including Iran's own ships, that is docked there is not allowed to leave. As a result, Iran is unable to export its oil. Now, many people might not have anticipated this, but this move will very quickly push Iran to the brink of collapse. Why? Because Iran's oil storage can only last for up to 2 weeks at most. After 2 weeks, if the oil still can't be shipped out, the entire oil industry will have to shut down. The oil industry will come to a standstill, and the oil industry is the lifeblood of Iran's economy. As a result of being unable to ship out the oil, the first consequence is a daily loss of $400 million in revenue. Over the course of a month, that adds up to a loss of $13 billion, and this $13 billion is currently Iran's only source of foreign exchange income. Iran's foreign exchange income comes from only two things. One is selling oil, and the other is selling steel and steel products. Its steel factories have already been destroyed by the United States and Israel, so there is no steel left to export, and if there is no oil income either, then the whole country will fall into the same situation as Venezuela did back then. The government and the dictator will have no money at all. If you have no money, how are you going to pay your troops? So how are you going to maintain your army? This is the first immediate impact. The second is that once the oil industry comes to a halt, it will have a huge effect on employment, because from extraction to processing, mainly extraction, the oil industry is a major pillar of large-scale employment in Iran. The number of jobs directly and indirectly affected is 1 million people, and these 1 million people have families, so if you multiply by 3 or 4, that's 3 to 4 million people. These are all, in Iran, these are families whose income is at least middle class or above. This will immediately impact Iran's social stability. Now, the third point is the blockade of the Strait and the US counter-blockade. The third impact, which I've already mentioned for 2 or 3 days now, is that there are currently 120 VLCCs, very large crude carriers. These large and ultra-large tankers are now heading toward the United States, heading to the Americas Bay. You can take a look at this picture. So many ships are coming from Europe and Asia, densely packed. On the left, I've circled an area. That circle is the Americas Bay, which used to be called the Gulf of Mexico, but now it's called the Americas Bay. That's the situation. What does this bring about? It brings about a shift in the global oil center of gravity, which is a very significant impact. When oil prices soar and supertankers rush to the United States from all directions, what will be the final result? The first result is that it will stimulate the US oil investment industry to make up its mind to invest and increase production. This is what will help the United States so quickly become a superpower in oil and natural gas. Now, the US is already the world's #1 in oil and natural gas production, right? And if they further increase their investment, because as everyone knows, oil investment is always a long-term investment. If you don't have a very clear goal, you won't do this kind of thing, right? So it's not that fast. But Trump always said, drill, baby, drill, meaning pump oil, open wells, drill for oil, drill wells. No matter what kind of rallying cry Trump had, it can't compare to the current situation, where oil tankers from all directions are converging on the United States. The market momentum coming in now is much faster. Therefore, this will greatly promote investment in the US oil industry and lead to a significant increase in production. This will enable the United States not only to be #1 in the world, but to achieve the status of a superpower in oil and natural gas. And the longer Iran blocks the Strait, including the longer the US maintains its counter-blockade, the more the US stands to benefit. So, as I mentioned to everyone yesterday, from the perspective of national interest, the US would actually prefer for the Strait to remain blocked indefinitely. This process is essentially the global oil center shifting from the Middle East to the United States. As you all know, although the United States is #1 in the world in oil and natural gas, who is second among the Middle Eastern countries? The second is Saudi Arabia, right? And third is Russia. But if you add Saudi Arabia together with all the Gulf countries, the entire Gulf region, the Middle East, their oil production is still over 20 million barrels more than the United States. The US only produces about 13 to 14 million barrels, so the oil center has always been in the Middle East. However, if this trend continues, we will see the process of the oil center shifting from the Middle East to the United States. But has the United States always intentionally waited for the Strait to keep going crazy? No, from a moral standpoint, the Trump administration actually hoped to open it up as soon as possible. So, although the Trump administration was careless, and I think careless is the right word here, as I've said before, it wasn't something they deliberately planned or designed. He carelessly created a situation where the United States could make a huge profit from war. However, Trump was still working hard to negotiate and open up the Strait as soon as possible. We all saw that in Islamabad regarding the failed negotiations that just ended in Islamabad, Pakistan. Supposedly, another round of talks is scheduled for Thursday, 2 days later. Meanwhile, the US Navy is conducting grid-pattern minesweeping operations in the Strait of Hormuz, clearing naval mines from the Strait, at the very least to open up 2 navigation channels. At the same time, they are also blockading Iran's ports, preventing Iranian warships from coming out. Actually, Iran doesn't really have any warships left. It's basically just those fast attack boats, offensive speedboats, to ensure the safety of commercial shipping. Okay, so at the same time, the US military has already prohibited all vessels capable of laying mines from continuing to operate underwater. What does that mean? It's like the strike model used against Venezuelan drug-running ships. If they see one, they take it out. You could almost call it a shoot-to-kill policy. That's the current situation right now. So a lot of people are still criticizing Trump, but actually the US is pretty relaxed right now. So if you look at it from an interest perspective, they really can just sit back and watch the Strait. If it stays locked down for a while longer, the US can make even more money. Then you might ask, what about the high gas prices at American gas stations? Well, Trump doesn't want to lose the midterm elections, does he? These high gas prices are just a phenomenon that will last for 2 or 3 months. Once the Strait opens up, gasoline prices will collapse overnight. So the public in the US will immediately forget about this period of high gas prices, right? Because once gas prices come down, everyone is happy. Yes, the after effects will immediately disappear, and only the positive effects will remain. So for Trump, this is actually a good situation right now. But has everyone noticed that this is the situation? However, out of a sense of morality and as a responsibility of being a global leader, Trump still has to make efforts to clear the mines in the Strait and reopen the Strait as soon as possible, even though the US could make huge profits during this period. So this is Trump's motivation. In many cases, he acts out of a sense of moral responsibility, and I think a lot of people can't really see this. Because Trump himself wouldn't explain this reasoning the way I am doing now. Actually, the Russia-Ukraine war is the same. I've told everyone this many times. Now that Russia and Ukraine are fighting like this, Ukraine is backed by the EU. The EU has no choice but to support Ukraine because they believe that if Ukraine can't hold out, then next will be Poland, then Hungary, then the Czech Republic, and then the 3 Baltic states. They must support Ukraine while the CCP stands behind Russia. Russia is economically weak, only about 1/12 the EU's size, so it cannot sustain a long war without backing. Ultimately, the CCP provides that support, creating a standoff between Europe and the CCP where both sides are locked in conflict, leaving neither side an exit. So, from the perspective of American interests, the US is basically sitting back and watching the tigers fight, right? Letting the world's major powers wear each other out. In the end, the US just reaps the benefits as the fisherman, doesn't it? Becoming a superpower. But the Trump administration didn't do that. In fact, it was the Trump administration that worked the hardest to get both sides to agree to a ceasefire. He spent even more time on this than he did on domestic policy. He also faced a lot of criticism for this, right? So why did Trump do it? There was just one reason, a single reason. He didn't want to see a lot of people from Russia and Ukraine die. That was the only reason Trump was committed to achieving a ceasefire. In other words, he did this out of moral principle. So let me just add a comment. Wouldn't it be good to have someone like this as the world's leader? Which other country's president would act like this? This isn't about abandoning morality for profit. It's about putting morality above profit, isn't it? That's why I sometimes say that Trump is the most misunderstood political figure in the world today. But I believe that, in the end, the world will come to understand him. All right, let's talk about the next topic. Last week on Saturday in Islamabad, the failed negotiations. So what did Vance have to say about it? Vance has already returned to the United States and has been interviewed by several media outlets. So his thoughts on the matter have gradually come out. Let me give everyone a summary of the main highlights. Vance said that the weekend negotiations were not a waste, not a failure, and that no time was wasted. There were very good discussions and there were several benefits. The first benefit was that we clarified our priorities as the United States. You now understand what we want, and that we absolutely cannot allow you to possess nuclear weapons. Second, we need the Strait of Hormuz to remain open. As for the Iranian side, he said that they have moved in the direction we requested. So there are some positive signals, but the movement hasn't gone far enough. That's the first highlight. The second highlight is that we have gained some knowledge about the Iranian negotiations. What does this mean? He said this is also ultimately the reason why we left Pakistan. He said, what did we discover? They discovered that the team sitting across from them at the negotiating table didn't have the final say. They had to go back to Tehran and get approval from the supreme leader or others before they could continue the talks. So it was pretty pointless. His side just got up and left. That's what it means. At the very least, they figured out who actually has the authority to make decisions. Thirdly, Wang Xi also responded to this. A reporter asked him, during the war, you were skeptical about Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu launching a war against Iran. How do you see it now? What was the situation back then? Yang Wanhui was very candid. He said, I would offer my advice to the President of the United States. This is what all of us do. I hope that when I give advice to the President, it remains confidential because the President should rely on his senior advisors for counsel. But these advisors shouldn't go running to the media. What he meant was, I privately shared my opinion with the president, but it ended up being leaked to the media. He said that leaking it out is wrong. That's what he meant. Then he said, what I want to say is, I 100% agree with the president's view. Iran must not possess nuclear weapons. So what do you all think? American politicians are really interesting, aren't they? Basically, especially in the Trump administration, both inside and out, everyone is on the same page and their statements are very straightforward. Okay, so the fourth point is that Vance said, even though the next move depends on Iran, the US still holds the initiative because we have military superiority. Vance said that by imposing a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, we are putting additional economic pressure on their oil exports. We have a lot of cards in our hand, we have leverage, so let's see what Iran does next. All right, so what will happen next? Actually, the current US blockade has only entered its second day. Now, Pakistan is actively mediating, trying to push for a second round of face-to-face negotiations between the US and Iran. What about Iran? According to reports, Iran is considering suspending some of its actions to ease the situation and has already conveyed through channels to the US its willingness to restart negotiations. Thirdly, US officials say that both sides are communicating and discussing the location, timing, and composition of delegations for a new round of talks, which may be held in Islamabad this Thursday or later this week. All right, let me mention something off topic. We all know that Hungary's former Prime Minister Orbán lost the election. So a reporter asked, knowing that he was going to lose, why did you still fly over there to support him? What were you after? What do you think he was after? Was it a misjudgment? Why did he go there? Vance said, we looked at the internal polls and knew that Orbán was very likely to lose, but why did we still go? You know, Vance always speaks very bluntly. He said the reason for going this time was simply to return a favor. He said that when the EU bureaucrats joined forces to strangle or sanction American companies out of the entire EU, 27 countries, there was only one dissenting vote. That dissenting vote was Hungary's. So he withstood the pressure from all of Europe. The vote that protected American interests came from Orban. When someone takes a bullet for America at a critical moment, then when he's in trouble, America has to back him up. This is the reason why I would go down with the ship. Even if defeat is certain, you still have to openly show your support. That's what it means to be loyal to your partners. Okay, so that's the situation. What does everyone think? Trump's administration is really quite interesting, isn't it? I think it's that kind of genuine personality, real people governing, not that cold impersonal style, not the way politicians usually govern. So what's the difference between politicians governing and real people governing? I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but I've given it some thought. When politicians are in charge, everything is indifferent, or at least has to be calm and emotionless. No matter what happens, they won't react personally. Instead, they'll say, we need to go back and discuss this, weigh everything carefully, and consider it from the perspective of national interests. So it lacks immediate feedback, which has its pros and cons. The advantage is that it's less likely to be impulsive. There's less chance of making a rash decision in the heat of the moment. But what's the downside? I think it often leads to doing bad things because there's no immediate effect, no instant feedback. When you do something bad, there are no short-term consequences. So, in a situation where the international community, or at the level of international politics, lacks morality, it easily encourages bad behavior. That's how I see it. What do you think? Yes, so I think the actions taken by the Trump administration this term, when you do something bad or say something wrong and there's an immediate reaction, this actually pulls the government back from being a cold or indifferent state machine to being like every other country, like real people, a real nation. Personally, I prefer this kind of thing. Otherwise, in this world, the effect of rewarding good and punishing evil really wouldn't come about. The cause and effect would be too far apart. That's my view. Of course, this is a bit theoretical. What do you think? I mean, about Trump's governing style, including Vance, for example. Even though I know clearly that supporting you will cost me political points, I still do it because I am loyal to my friends. This is treating the national government, the state power, as if it were a person, as if the country is a living being, just like a human. Do you agree with Trump's approach, or Trump together with Vance and his team? Repay kindness with kindness and resentment with resentment. To put it plainly, what's going on here is genuine emotion. Do you like this or not, or do you prefer the traditional kind of politics? How about we do a poll? Do you prefer a government that shows genuine emotion, or do you prefer the so-called old government, the previous government, not necessarily traditional, but the kind that is cold, indifferent, and unemotional? Let's put it that way. Do you prefer a government with real, genuine emotion or a government without emotion? Shall we do a poll? Okay, next, let me tell everyone about the Chinese Communist Party's reaction. I mentioned to you all a few days ago that the CCP every day, every single day, 5 million barrels. So these 5 million barrels of crude oil were originally supposed to come from the Strait of Hormuz, with 1.4 million barrels from Iran and 3.6 million barrels from Gulf countries other than Iran. Now, Iran is blocking oil tankers from the Gulf countries, while the United States is blocking Iranian oil tankers. So none of the oil can be shipped to China. That's why yesterday, China's Minister of Defense Dong Jun said, "We warn the United States not to interfere with the passage through the Strait of Hormuz because we have trade and energy agreements with Iran." What does that mean? It means they're starting to talk tough, saying they won't allow the US to block their ships. These words are quite attention-grabbing. What everyone wants to know is what will happen next. First, will the United States intercept your ships? Second, if your ships are intercepted, what will you do? Will you send warships to the Middle East? Okay, let me first share my comments. Regarding what Dong Jun said, what he means is that Iran can act like a rogue, but the United States cannot. In other words, to put it even more precisely, Iran can be a bully, but the United States cannot. But in reality, that's how it has been throughout history. However, during the Trump administration, it became possible. So, of course, it's not that the United States became a bully, but rather the United States became a good bully. The world finally got a leader who doesn't try to reason with bullies, but instead matches them with strength. What do you think about that? So the key point is, after Mr. Ha finishes speaking, will it actually make a difference? Will the CCP show its fists? Where exactly are your fists? All right, so right now, outside the Strait of Hormuz, the United States has 2 aircraft carrier strike groups. One is the USS Lincoln, and the other is the USS Ford. That's at least 15 ships, the most advanced warships in the world, all stationed in the Arabian Sea outside the Gulf of Oman. And then in the Mediterranean, there's another ship, well, not just a ship, but another aircraft carrier fleet. The USS George H.W. Bush has already passed through the Strait of Gibraltar and is heading toward the western coast of Israel. So over there are at least 5 ships, 5 warships, so that brings the total up to 20. So what about China? Are you going to come and provide escort too? How many ships are you going to send? Do you dare to confront the United States head on? Now that you've said it, you have to follow through. So how are you going to do that? Of course, we know the Chinese Communist Party also has 3 aircraft carriers, right? You can't just use them for show, can you? Whether they're the real deal or not, shouldn't you bring them out and put them to the test? That's my suggestion for them. So how about we do a poll? Do you all think that after Dong Jun made his tough statement, the Chinese military ships will come to the Strait of Hormuz to provide escort? Will we be able to see Chinese escort warships protecting their ship's passage? That's the question I'm posing to everyone. All right, let me give you an example now. Let's put aside for the moment whether we can see Chinese escort warships. Let's first look at what happens when the US imposes a blockade. There is a Chinese cruise ship called the Fuxing, and its English name is Rich Story. It sails under the flag of Malawi, an African country. It was carrying crude oil from the United Arab Emirates, not even Iranian oil, back to China. But when it reached the turn near the Strait of Hormuz, it went to an Iranian checkpoint to pay fees. It is said that now, in negotiations between China and Iran, the money that the Chinese Communist Party pays is in renminbi. No, there's no need to spend US dollars, but in the end, it was discovered by the US military. Even though you were carrying oil from the UAE, because you paid Iran a transit fee, the US military directly warned this ship to turn back. So, as everyone could see from the shipping maps, this Chinese ship obediently turned around and returned to the Persian Gulf. Therefore, it became the first vessel to be intercepted after the US military blockade. And this vessel wasn't even stopped by Iran. It was from the UAE, but the US military still sent it back. This is the first signal the US military sent to the Chinese Communist Party. The rules have changed. Now, in the Strait of Hormuz, the US calls the shots. This ship obediently turned back. So the next question is, in another 3 weeks, or maybe 2 weeks, will Chinese warships come? Will they escort the Fuxing again? This is the main topic of our news today, the main question. Then the big boss Xi Jinping spoke up. The headline from Xinhua News Agency is, "The world cannot fall into the law of the jungle." What's going on? Xi Jinping, the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, met on Tuesday with the visiting Crown Prince of the UAE. Yes, the same country whose oil was intercepted. The visiting UAE Crown Prince is Khalid. Then, he put forward 4 proposals to maintain and promote peace and stability in the Middle East. Yes, these are 4 proposals regarding the situation in Iran. Let's listen to the first one. See what Xi Jinping says. From his tone, you can tell what the Chinese Communist Party wants to do. First, uphold the principle of peaceful coexistence. What does that mean? It means that Middle Eastern countries, especially those in the Gulf region, should maintain good relations with each other. Second, uphold the principle of national sovereignty. That is to say, sovereignty is the foundation for all countries, especially developing countries, to survive and thrive, and it must not be violated. That's the second point. The third point is to uphold the principle of international rule of law. What does that mean? Safeguard the authority of international law. It cannot be used when convenient and discarded when not. We cannot allow the world to regress to the law of the jungle. Fourth is to adhere to a coordinated approach to development and security. What does this mean? All parties should work to create a favorable environment for the development of Middle Eastern and Gulf countries and inject positive energy. So how should we interpret what Xi Jinping said here? Points 1, 2, and 4 are all empty talk. The third point, about not letting the world return to the law of the jungle, at least has a bit of substance, but even that is softened. So what do I take away from this? It's completely powerless. The Chinese Communist Party neither has the strength nor the will to provide escort in the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, even if they did go, they wouldn't dare to go head-to-head with the United States. That's what I read from this. Did you get the same impression? Did everyone else? Of course, what he's saying here is also a double standard. What sovereignty? All this and that, right? If you care about sovereignty, why do you support Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Why do you want to invade Taiwan, right? Where is your sovereignty then? But no matter what, I think what I read from this is that the CCP simply has no way and doesn't dare to confront the United States. Even if their Minister of Defense says something, even if their so-called General Secretary says something, I believe the CCP wouldn't dare to confront the US outside the Strait of Hormuz. Let's see if what I'm saying is right. Just read 2 articles and you'll know. News like this actually can't be seen by friends inside China. So when it comes to the details of this incident, analyses from different perspectives, and even first-hand footage from the scene, all of it is filtered and reduced layer by layer, or even directly disappears. So in this situation, it's not that people in China don't care, but rather that they simply have no chance to see the complete information. So, let me say it again. We are currently promoting the One-Chain VPN project. For every $2,000 we raise, we can provide 100 free and secure VPN links for friends in mainland China, and each link can be accessed by thousands or even tens of thousands of people. We will randomly distribute these to friends in mainland China, giving them a chance to access the outside world. We have always believed that as long as information is complete and not deliberately filtered, everyone has the ability to use their own minds to make the right judgments rather than passively accepting a single version of the narrative as some kind of alarm bell or lucky charm. This is why we persist in doing this, and also why I call on overseas Chinese to join us in this effort. Our purpose is that we have a responsibility. In the free world, we have the responsibility to deliver the real original information to the other side of the CCP's firewall, instead of processed content. If you agree with the value of this cause, we welcome your support for this project. The link is right below. Any amount of help from you, whether it's tens, hundreds, or even thousands, is appreciated. This could very well be the first time our compatriots in mainland China see the truth. All right, let's talk about this next. The relevant link is below. You can find it there. Now let me talk about this so-called miracle. Many Chinese people might not pay much attention to this news, but let me explain it to you. Once you hear it, you'll understand. Israel and Lebanon are going to be in Washington, D.C. They are going to sit down and start negotiations. You might ask, what's so remarkable about that? Since Israel was founded in the Middle East in 1948 up until today, these two countries have never sat down to talk even once. Isn't that the case? And the two sides have fought 4 wars, and there have been more than a dozen smaller conflicts. So Israel is in the south, and Lebanon is its neighbor to the north. For nearly 80 years, the two sides have regarded each other as bitter enemies like fire and water. That's the situation. So when they sat down to talk in the United States, who was supposed to host? The person who hosted was named Rubio. But who should have hosted? It should have been French President Macron. Why do I say that? Well, let me explain. Because Lebanon, as a former Western colony, its former suzerain was France. But not only did France not host these talks, it wasn't even invited to participate. It was completely left out. What does this mean? Let me briefly explain to everyone. This means that Israel's northern neighbor, Lebanon, could be facing significant changes. Let me tell you a bit about Lebanon. Lebanon is made up of 3 main ethnic groups. One is the Muslim Shia, another is the Muslim Sunni, and the third is Christians. Each of these 3 groups has its own representatives, and all of them can participate in politics. The party that represents the Shia is called Hezbollah. Because of support from Iran, it has become exceptionally powerful, to the point of becoming a state within a state. The way it operates is by engaging in terrorist attacks. When it comes to attacking Israel, they strike indiscriminately, making no distinction between military and civilian targets, and sometimes even deliberately targeting civilians. Therefore, it has been designated as a terrorist organization by the US government and by many countries around the world as well. However, France separates it, saying that its military wing is a terrorist organization, but its political wing is not. But it's actually one entity. How can you separate them? You're really making excuses for them, going out of your way to justify them. Anyway, the key point here is that the Lebanese government is powerless against them. Why is that? First, it has a certain degree of legitimacy. You can't even call it a state within a state, because it has its own elected representatives. Second, and this is the key point, its military power is extremely strong. The Lebanese government forces are simply no match for it. So they can only tolerate it for a long time and don't dare to provoke it. Now, Hezbollah in Lebanon is entrenched in the south and also in the east of Lebanon and has been fighting Israel because, after all, it's Israel's neighbor, so it's very close for them to attack Israel. Now, if you attack Israel, of course, Israel is not easy to bully. If you attack me, I will fight back. I will strike back at you. So Israel often crosses the border to pursue and attack into Lebanon because of Hezbollah's assaults. That's why the two sides have fought 4 wars and countless smaller skirmishes. This time on February 28th, within 2 days after the US and Israel began attacking Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon started launching rockets at Israel. This was the first response in support of Iran. Other armed groups in the Middle East, like the Houthis, didn't dare to make a move. The pro-Iranian militias in Iraq also didn't dare to take action, so only Hezbollah dared to make a move. That's why this time Israel is determined to wipe out Hezbollah. They are even willing to permanently occupy southern Lebanon to establish a buffer zone. Because of this, Israel has come into direct conflict with the Lebanese government. So now here's the situation. Trump's ceasefire was originally supposed to last for 2 weeks, right? After negotiating with Iran, they agreed on a 2-week ceasefire. Lebanon wasn't included in the agreement, so as a result, Iran said, then I won't cease fire either. You must stop attacking Hezbollah. Since you won't stop, I won't cease fire either. So after the ceasefire, Iran has continued attacking various civilian facilities in the Gulf countries, using this as an excuse. Of course, this has also made Lebanon a focal point at the moment. The question is, what should be done? What should we do? For example, President Trump took action, so what about us? Israel and the Lebanese government join forces, sit down together to negotiate peace, and work together to eliminate Hezbollah. That's the solution he proposed. Okay, so the common ground between the two sides is no longer their historical grievances, but rather Hezbollah. So this is the current point of interest. The first highlight is that under the mediation of the United States, for the first time in history, the Israeli government and the Lebanese government, who have never cooperated and have only had a relationship of conflict, are sitting down to talk and jointly eradicating terrorist forces. Hezbollah within Lebanon would be completely eliminated, leaving no future threats. First is the disarmament of Hezbollah. Second, regarding France, the former colonial power is now sidelined from the process. Why would they want to be involved? France actually has major interests here. What is their relationship with Lebanon? We all know that in 1920, after the end of World War I and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, one of the regions under their control was called Lebanon. At that time, Lebanon was placed under the League of Nations, what we now call the League of Nations. The League of Nations assigned Lebanon to be administered by France. Why? Because the Christians in Lebanon, known as the Maronite Church, had a very close relationship with France. It's a Catholic church, a Catholic denomination. So France has always been the protector of this group of Christians.